Greetings everyone! This is a quick promo before the video begins. If you're new to the channel and you didn't know it yet, I am actually an author in addition to being a YouTuber, and I have 2 books that you can get on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1 and The Occult Mafia. The first is sort of a bizarre, absurdist kaiju anime mashup, and the other is a horror noir story with a hint of a western thrown in there. They're both set in the same universe, and at this point have received mostly positive reviews, so you might want to check them out. I've provided Amazon links for both of them down in the description. They're both available in either paperback or Amazon Kindle, and Operation Red Dragon is also available in audiobook form. So if either of these strike your fancy and you want to support a struggling artist, feel free to go down and check out either one or both of them. Alright, the shameless self-promotion is out of the way, we can get on with the video. Thank you all for your support. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni Viewer, and welcome to Genre Bender's Obscurities and Flawed Gems, where we look at the best stuff you've never heard of. I'm sure all of you have in one form or another heard of anime and manga, the respective terms referring to Japanese animation and comics. There is, however, a third pillar in that triumvirate, known as the light novel.
Also sometimes called ranobe, the light novel is a modern-day extension of the pulp novel. They are generally shorter than your average full-length novels and are usually accompanied by manga-style drawings strategically placed throughout to visualize key moments. For those who are wondering, I have indeed read certain translated examples, specifically the first entries of Spice and Wolf, Full Metal Panic, and The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, each of which were adapted into very popular anime series, which I have also seen.
Despite being a Japanese medium, there are many international authors who write in the ranobe style, and I happen to have a recently released example with me today. Say your prayers, folks, because it's time to endure God's Wrath Tournament of the Divine by William Carney.
Omni, according to our notes, you didn't pronounce his last name right. In fact, you also screwed it up during the art video.
You're kidding. I've gotten it wrong every time? Well, I'll just keep trying. I'm bound to get it at some point. Anyway, better get to summarizing William Carney's book.
5 years ago, the gods returned. All of them. Jehovah, Odin, Vishnu, and all of the other top-tier gods, called monarchs, made their presence known to mankind. They exist, though they aren't exactly as mankind pictured them over the centuries, and their numbers have dwindled after a devastating event known simply as the Day. In order to replenish their numbers and forge a new bond with humanity, the monarchs have initiated a process wherein the deceased gods will be reborn from human women, slightly different than before, but otherwise still divine. Of course, there are some gods who live for war and conflict, so they have been provided an outlet for their aggression by way of the God's Wrath Tournaments, a gladiator-style sports event that has become the most popular TV program in the world. Living in this new world of gods and monsters is Virgil Knight, a young mythologist in a rut. He's got no money, lives out of a rundown RV he inherited from his late grandfather, and he has hemophilia to boot. However, his profession as a mythologist, while not lucrative, qualifies him to be a caretaker for a reborn god, which also qualifies him for financial aid since gods have expensive needs. Virgil's charge is Sun Wukong, the Monkey King from the Journey to the West. It turns out, though, that King is somewhat of a misleading title, as Sun turns out to be an attractive young woman who looks far more human than Simian after her rebirth. Sun is energetic, tomboyish, and has a very different sense of modesty and personal space than Virgil does, which means that cohabitation has brought on some unforeseen difficulties. Oh, and lest I forget, a recent rebirth in the Orkney Islands went horribly wrong and resulted in a bloodbath. Now some sort of grotesque monster is skulking around killing people by skinning them alive, and it's headed for the city where Virgil and Sun live.
That is a lot to take in, I realize, and I'm sure you might worry that God's Wrath has bitten off more than it can chew. You can rest assured, though, that William Carnival managed to fit it all in here without making the book feel bloated.
Lots of world building is sprinkled throughout the book, much of which springs up naturally from the situations the characters find themselves in. For example, there's an extended sequence which reveals how atheists have responded to the new normal where gods are undeniably real. It turns out that while most just went with the flow, There remain a few who have become reactionary fanatics that hate the gods on principle and protest their very existence. For other information that doesn't fit so easily into the main plot, like how the rebirthing process works, there are several interlude chapters to explain things.
It fits together in a way that mostly doesn't disrupt the flow. I say mostly because there are some explanations that require lengthy detours from scenes in progress.
For example, we learn that stuff about how atheists reacted to the god's return as Virgil and Sun encounter an irate atheist, and the scene is interspersed with Virgil's narrative explanations, and those bits take up a lot of space, extending a short encounter across multiple pages. Now, I've seen this sort of thing done in a lot of older works, so there is precedent for that sort of exposition delivery, but I don't doubt that for some readers it might take some getting used to.
World building aside, the characters are what really shine through in William Colonel Sanders' book.
Now, anyone familiar with the works that inspired William Corn on the Cob will no doubt recognize the setup here. Ordinary guy winds up cohabitating with extraordinary girl, hilarity ensues. If you're at all familiar with anime or manga, you've probably come across at least one series with that as part of its premise, probably more. And they can tend to be fairly predictable. The ordinary guy is usually a milquetoast hollow shell for the reader to project into, and the extraordinary girl is the manic pixie dream girl archetype that's become such a point of contention among commentators.
God's Wrath is no mere retread, though. It's got way more personality than your average trend chasers.
Virgil Knight has a lot of recognizable traits, being a mostly regular guy who struggles to maintain his composure in his new circumstances, but he's got a lot of personality to make him stand out.
What really sets him apart is his medical condition. The average protagonist in this kind of story tends to be rather bland and forgettable because they're lacking in substance, specifically when it comes to flaws. They either have no flaws to speak of, or they have flaws that aren't really flaws. A male protagonist might be an aloof loner, or a female protagonist might say she's not pretty, but she actually is pretty. Those aren't flaws, and they're not interesting.
Virgil, meanwhile, is a hemophiliac, which means his blood doesn't clot the way blood is meant to, so something as minor as a paper cut could potentially kill him if it's not dealt with properly. This is further compounded by him having a bum leg and needing a cane to walk, which limits his mobility. Virgil is a genuinely fragile entity, and this affects his ability to do things that might support him and Sun. He wants to be the protector and provider, yet he's incapable of being either.
His attempts to overcome his limitations lead to him making some pretty questionable decisions like, but I don't want to spoil anything.
Sun, meanwhile, makes for a great foil to Virgil. Now, perhaps you're wondering why William Curveball chose Sun Wukong, and why he decided to make this traditionally male character female.
Well, he chose Sun because he's a big fan of Journey to the West, and the sex flip was in reference to another one of his influences, the Fate series, which features Saber, a female version of King Arthur.
With that cleared up, William Curzon-Way does assign some recognizable anime girl traits to Sun, such as giving her a jealous streak when other women are around, or being an extreme extrovert to counter her male companion's introversion. Even so, he makes a point of maintaining the original Sun's personality as a proud, confident, yet still amicable character, someone who never backs down from a fight and is loyal to the bitter end. He also takes a few liberties with the legend to make the character his own, such as reinterpreting Sun's backstory to make her a bit more of an outsider, and hinting that there are parts of her story that nobody knows because they are very personal. Sure, her different sense of modesty leads to some fanservice-y moments, but I don't think these should detract from the rest of her character.
I mean, that would be as ridiculous as freaking out at a character for being short and having large breasts. Can you imagine if people got mad over something as trivial as that?
Yeah, that would be the dumbest thing ever.
No kidding. Anyway, the book also introduces several supporting characters who leave quite an impression despite their limited appearances.
Another sex flip deity who turns up is Susanoo, a storm god who is represented here as a hard-drinking, shamelessly perverted lesbian shacking up with Momoko Hirata, a mousy Shinto priestess who is terrified of everything. Their brief interaction with Sun and Virgil is played mostly for laughs, especially when it comes to Susanoo brazenly flirting with the Monkey King, and I'm sure it will leave readers wanting to see more of them. We also meet Elle, a girl from Virgil's past with a penchant for getting under people's skin. Virgil describes her as devilish and nearly impossible to like, yet her introductory scene left me wondering how accurate that description really is.
I don't say that to imply that the writing is inconsistent, but rather because it seems like there's more to L than meets the eye.
As for the villain, well, I don't want to give too much away about that, but I will say the creature who serves as the book's main antagonist is an especially disturbing beast. Any chapter in which it attacks is truly horrifying, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Again, I don't want to give anything away, but the weak of stomach might not want to eat before reading these segments.
What really stands out to me is the authenticity on display. If you didn't know that William Curbstomp was an English-speaking American author, you might think this book actually originated from Japan.
The writing style and dialogue feels very reminiscent of how actual light novels and anime series are written, even down to how the humor is executed. Great pains were taken to make this story really feel like a proper light novel, and it pays off. Now, given how different the Japanese style of writing is from the English style of writing, there will no doubt be an adjustment for some readers. A devoted otaku like me might not notice. I mean, I did notice, but only because I make reviews, but casual audiences are another story. I want to make it clear that the way in which God's Wrath is written is a deliberate stylistic choice, and if you perceive it as bad writing, you've ultimately missed what's being done.
There are, however, some writing issues with the book. Comma splices can be found throughout, and some of the phraseology is a little bit clunky when you read it out loud.
Even if you can chalk that up to how the book is written in first-person present tense, some of the writing still feels a bit wonky at points. Hopefully this is improved upon in book 2.
That's probably another thing I should mention. God's Wrath is the first book in a series, and the second one is on its way. Originally, William Curnier, an idiot, wrote the first 2 books as one book, but realized it was far too long and found a place to naturally split it in half.
If this were adapted to a series, book 1 would cover maybe the first 3 or 4 episodes. That being said, the story does reach a satisfying conclusion, even as it sets up the next entry, so this isn't just 250 pages of setup for when the real story begins. I mean, yes, there is setup for later events, but it isn't done in excess. You'll end the book wanting more without feeling that you didn't get enough in the first place.
So is God's Wrath Tournament of the Divine worth reading? I would say so.
It's rough around the edges, sure, but William Cornwallis put a lot of effort into making this feel like the real thing, and I'd say it worked. In conversation, he's told me that he's got big multimedia plans for this story, and I can definitely see that materializing if the books do well.
Ergo, I would recommend checking it out. It's got a good premise, it puts some new spins on old concepts, and it's just plain fun to read. So sure, go ahead and give it a read. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Say, did I ever get his last name right?
Nope. Honestly, it sounded like you'd stopped trying by the end.
Oh well, there's always next time.
If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Like and subscribe, then go down to the description to find links to follow us on DeviantArt, Patreon, and Twitter. While you're there, you'll also find the Amazon links for the original novels Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, and The Occult Mafia. 2 books I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.